From the outside, Ethan and Rachel Caldwell were everything people aspired to be. They had the penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline, the cars that gleamed under city lights, and the kind of marriage that photographed beautifully, the kind filled with champagne toasts, spontaneous getaways, and carefully staged smiles. Their friends called them the golden couple. Their families envied their success. On social media, they were the picture of elegance and stability, wrapped in filters and laughter. But behind the high glass walls of apartment 42B, silence had settled like dust in the corners, too fine to notice at first, until it coated everything. It was a Thursday evening when Ethan realized he no longer knew how to start a conversation with his wife. He sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through old emails while Rachel prepared dinner. The sound of the knife against the cutting board was rhythmic, methodical, detached. The faint aroma of garlic filled the air, mingling with the distant hum of the city below. "Did you see the news, Issa?" he asked, just to break the stillness. Rachel didn't look up. "About what?" "Another tech merger. Horizon bought out Metrics." "That's good for you, right?" she said automatically, her tone polite but absent. "Yeah, I guess." She turned back to the vegetables, her expression neutral. He watched her, noticing the way her hair fell slightly over her face, the diamond on her finger catching the kitchen light. There had been a time he would have reached out, tucked that strand of hair behind her ear, kissed her shoulder while she cooked. Now, even a touch felt intrusive, almost foreign. Dinner was quiet, forks scraping plates, glasses clinking, words sparse and functional. "How's work?" he asked finally. Rachel's smile was thin. "Busy. We landed a new cosmetics account. Long hours, but worth it." "That's good," he said softly, though he knew she'd been coming home past midnight all week. They finished eating without another word. She cleared the plates before he could offer to help, rinsing them under running water that drowned out the silence. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching her shoulders tense as she worked. There was something about the way she avoided his eyes, deliberate, practiced, that made him feel like a guest in his own home. When she finally turned off the water, she spoke without looking at him. "You're quiet tonight." "So are you," he replied. Rachel gave a small shrug, wiping her hands on a towel. "I'm just tired." She always said that now. Tired. It had become the explanation for everything: her mood, her distance, the way she barely touched him in bed anymore. Later that night, Ethan lay awake beside her. The city pulsed outside their window car horns, distant sirens, the muted throb of nightlife. Rachel's breathing was slow, steady, her back turned toward him. He studied the curve of her shoulder under the blanket, the faint line where her shirt slipped off one side. He reached out, almost touching her, but stopped himself. The space between them on the bed felt wider than the room itself. He turned his gaze to the ceiling, watching the reflections of city lights ripple across it like water. He tried to remember the last time they had truly laughed together, not the polite laughter shared at dinner parties, but the real kind, the kind that came from being known. Maybe it was 2 years ago, on their anniversary trip to Lake Tahoe. She had burned the marshmallows, and they'd laughed until they cried. They'd made love that night under a blanket of stars, whispering promises about forever. Forever had become a fragile word since then. In the morning, Rachel was already dressed when Ethan woke. She stood by the mirror, applying lipstick with a precision that seemed to belong more to performance than routine. Her reflection caught his eyes through the glass. "Morning," he said, his voice still heavy with sleep. "Morning," she replied without turning. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep." She glanced at him briefly, then back at her reflection. "Try melatonin. Works for me." He smiled faintly, though she didn't see it. "You've been taking that a lot lately." "Long days," she murmured, adjusting her blazer. Her phone buzzed on the dresser. She looked at it quickly, typing something before slipping it into her purse. "New client?" he asked. Yeah, campaign kickoff meeting today. Might be a late night. Again? She met his eyes in the mirror, then just for a second before looking away. That's how it is right now, Ethan. You know how agency life gets. He nodded, but the pit in his stomach grew heavier. She kissed his cheek on her way out, a light, perfunctory gesture that smelled faintly of rose perfume and distance. The door closed softly, and with it went the last echo of her heels down the hallway. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty doorway. He felt a familiar ache, not anger, not jealousy, but something quieter and far more corrosive. The ache of being unseen by the person who once knew every corner of your soul. At work, his colleagues often asked about Rachel. How's your wife? She's stunning. You two are lucky to have found each other. He would smile, nod, play the part. It was easier to let them believe the myth. That evening, he came home to a half-lit apartment. Rachel's coat was draped over the sofa, her scent lingering in the air. Dinner was cold takeout from an untouched container on the counter. She was in the study, typing furiously on her laptop. When she noticed him, she closed it almost too quickly. Hey, she said, did you eat? Not yet. There's Ty in the kitchen. He nodded. Thanks. She hesitated, then added softly, I'll be done soon. He didn't believe her. He didn't argue either. He just stood there, seeing the faint glow of her screen, the wine glass half full beside it, the subtle tension in her jaw. Later, when he lay in bed alone again, the same silence returned. It was no longer awkward or painful. It was simply familiar, like background noise. The quiet had become their language, the only one they both still understood. Outside, the city whispered with life. Inside, their marriage faded quietly, unseen beneath the hum of the refrigerator and the soft beating of two hearts drifting further apart. The first sign came on a Sunday. It was late autumn, the kind of gray Chicago morning when the air felt heavy with silence. Ethan woke to find Rachel's side of the bed already empty. Her phone was gone. Her scent, that familiar, faint trace of rose and sandalwood, lingered on the pillow. He lay there for a while, listening to the distant hum of traffic below, the city waking up. When he finally got up and walked into the kitchen, he found a note on the counter, scribbled hastily on a yellow post-it, went for a jog. Be back soon. Rachel never jogged on Sundays. He made coffee, waiting for the sound of the elevator doors opening down the hall. When she returned, cheeks flushed and hair pulled back into a messy bun, there was something off, not in what she said, but how she moved. She was distracted, checking her phone before even taking off her running shoes. You went far? He asked. Just along the lakefront, she replied, avoiding his eyes. Needed some air. She brushed past him to pour a glass of water. The faint smell that followed her wasn't her usual perfume. It was sharper, unfamiliar, something woody and masculine, faint but undeniable. Ethan froze for a moment. She noticed his stare. What? She asked, half smiling, defensive already. Nothing, he said quickly. You smell different, that's all. Rachel looked down at herself, sniffed the sleeve of her jacket. Probably someone at the gym. Those machines are packed. You know how people sweat. He nodded. He did know. But he also knew Rachel never used the gym on weekends. The next few days passed quietly, but the feeling in Ethan's chest grew, that uneasy, restless sensation of something slipping away just beyond reach. Monday night, she came home late again. The apartment was dim except for the glow of his laptop screen. Ethan had been pretending to work, but he'd spent most of the evening staring at the clock, listening to the ticking that filled the silence. When Rachel finally walked in, it was nearly 11. She looked radiant in a way that made his heart twist, cheeks flushed, eyes brighter than they had been in months. Hey, she said casually, dropping her bag on the sofa. Sorry, long client dinner. With who? Creative team. And the client, of course. She kicked off her heels and stretched her legs, sighing in exhaustion. I think we're close to landing their account. He forced a smile. That's good. News. Yeah. She hesitated, then looked at him, perhaps sensing his doubt. Ethan, don't start. You know how these things go, late meetings, drinks, small talk. It's work. He didn't respond. She poured herself a glass of wine and disappeared into the bedroom. That night, as she showered, Ethan picked up her phone from the coffee table. His hand trembled slightly. He had never done this before, never crossed that invisible line. He told himself it was just curiosity, but deep down, he already knew it was fear. Her phone was locked. It had never been before. He stared at the passcode screen, the black mirror reflecting his face back at him, tired, uncertain, ashamed. When she emerged from the shower, he quickly set the phone down and pretended to scroll through emails. Still working? She asked, drying her hair. Trying to. She nodded, unconcerned. Within minutes, she was in bed, scrolling her phone in the dark, the blue light flickering across her face like an electric veil. Ethan lay beside her, staring at the ceiling again, listening to the faint clicks of her typing. Then quietly, she turned off the screen and set it face down on the nightstand. When her breathing steadied, he rolled over to his side, closing his eyes, but sleep didn't come. It was strange, he thought, how infidelity wasn't always discovered by proof, but by atmosphere, the subtle, invisible shift in how someone occupies a room. Rachel's energy had changed. She smiled differently now, as if guarding something precious and private. Her phone was always close to her, even in the bathroom. She hummed while dressing for work. She wore lipstick again, the shade he used to compliment her for. On Wednesday, Ethan left work early and stopped by her office. He told himself it was spontaneous a surprise, a small gesture to reconnect. But when he reached the glass-walled floor of her advertising firm, he froze. Through the wide hallway, he saw her standing near the elevator with a man he didn't recognize. The man leaned in, saying something that made her laugh, that soft, unguarded laugh Ethan hadn't heard in months. He watched as the man's hand brushed her arm lightly, not in a way that could be called inappropriate, but intimate enough to make Ethan's throat tighten. Rachel looked around, adjusted her hair, and stepped into the elevator with him. Ethan didn't move. He felt the air leave his lungs, his body rooted to the floor. The receptionist smiled politely as she passed him a visitor's badge, unaware that his world had just shifted. He didn't take the elevator. He left the building instead, walking into the sharp chill of evening. The city was alive horns, chatter, laughter spilling from cafes, and yet everything sounded distant, muffled, as though he were underwater. At home, he sat in the dark for a long time. The clock ticked past 10 before Rachel returned, cheerful and breathless, carrying takeout. Thought we could eat together for once, she said lightly. He smiled faintly. That's nice. She talked about her day deadlines, pitches, a new client's unrealistic expectations. She didn't mention the man at the elevator. When she went to bed, Ethan stayed behind staring at her untouched food. He wasn't angry. Not yet. Just hollow. Suspicion was a quiet poison, and he could feel it moving through him, slow and cold. In the days that followed, every small thing became a clue. A late-night text she smiled at before turning her phone upside down. The faint trace of cologne on her scarf. The way she started humming again when getting dressed. On Friday night, Rachel left for another client dinner. Ethan watched her from the window as she hailed a cab. She looked beautiful, radiant in a black coat and red lipstick. He used to feel proud seeing her like that. Now, it only hurt. When she disappeared into the traffic below, he stood there a long time, his reflection merging with the city lights. His home felt larger than ever, the walls colder, the silence louder. He turned off the lights and sat in the dark, his mind looping the same thought again and again. If she's hiding something, do I really want to know? The question stayed with him all night, echoing through the emptiness like the faint sound of her laughter fading down a hallway he could no longer follow. It was the second week of December when Ethan's suspicion hardened into something heavier, something that pulsed in his chest like a second heartbeat. Snow had started to fall over Chicago, dusting the streets in quiet white. Christmas lights blinked from windows, couples held hands under scarves, and everywhere he went, the city seemed to remind him of love. Love, that word now felt foreign, like a language he used to speak fluently but had forgotten over time. Rachel had been working late more often than usual. The excuses came easily, smooth as silk: deadlines, client revisions, a campaign launch. She'd say it all with the same weary smile, her eyes never quite meeting his. Ethan tried to believe her. He wanted to. But faith requires trust, and trust is fragile once it cracks. That Thursday, she left the apartment early, before sunrise, claiming she had a presentation to finish. Ethan lingered by the window, watching her car disappear into the gray morning. He stood there for a while, coffee cooling in his hand, his breath fogging the glass. Something inside him whispered that today would change everything. By mid-morning, he found himself sitting in his car outside her office building, engine idling. He didn't plan to be there. He had simply driven, aimlessly at first, until instinct led him to her. The parking lot was half empty, a few employees hurrying through the cold. He waited. At 9:12, a silver sedan pulled in, one he didn't recognize. Dylan Ross stepped out. Ethan knew the name. He'd seen it once on an email header, once more in conversation when Rachel mentioned him casually, a junior creative, smart but reckless. Dylan was younger, maybe late 20s, tall, charming in a careless way. Ethan watched as he walked inside with a paper cup of coffee in each hand. Something twisted inside Ethan's stomach. Not rage, not yet, but something sharp and undeniable. Hours passed. He sat in silence, the city's noise muted behind his windshield. He watched people come and go, office lights flicker on and off. Around lunchtime, he finally stepped out of the car, snow crunching under his boots. The lobby smelled of pine-scented air freshener and coffee. At the receptionist's desk, a young woman smiled politely. "Can I help you?" "I'm here for Rachel Caldwell," Ethan said, his voice calm, steady. "Is she expecting you?" "No, just a surprise visit." The receptionist typed something on her screen. "She's out for a client lunch, I'm afraid. Should be back around 2. He nodded, pretending to accept it. "Thanks." As he turned to leave, something on the counter caught his eye. A stack of glossy, printed schedules. One page had Rachel's name at the top. Below it, handwritten in the corner, "Lunch Wout DR, 12:30 Cielo." Cielo, the restaurant by the river, where they'd celebrated their 3rd anniversary. Ethan drove there without thinking, his pulse steady but heavy. The restaurant's windows glowed with warm light against the snow. Inside, the air was soft with music and conversation. He asked the hostess for a table by the window. From there, he saw them, Rachel and Dylan. They sat close, not touching, but close enough that Ethan could feel the electricity between them even from across the room. Rachel was laughing, not the polite, controlled laughter she used at home, but the easy, unguarded kind he hadn't heard in years. Dylan leaned forward, his hand resting casually on the table, inches from hers. She didn't pull away. For a long time, Ethan just watched. The world seemed to shrink around their table, every flicker of her hair, every tilt of her smile carved itself into his memory. It was strangely quiet inside his mind, as if emotion had stepped aside to make room for observation. He wasn't seeing his wife. He was seeing evidence. After 45 minutes, they stood to leave. Ethan didn't move until they were gone. When he finally stepped outside, the wind hit him hard, slicing through his coat. He walked along the river until he couldn't feel his fingers. He didn't confront her that night. When she came home, cheeks flushed from the cold, he simply said, "Long day?" "Exhausting," she replied, kicking off her boots. "You?" "Same." She kissed him lightly, the faint scent of wine still on her lips. He kissed her back, and for the first time, it meant nothing. That night, when she fell asleep, Ethan got up quietly and went to the study. Her phone was charging on the desk. His hands shook slightly as he unlocked it. The code came to him. Suddenly, their anniversary date. For a second, he almost laughed at the irony. The messages were there. Dozens of them. Dylan Ross. At first, just work-related. Ideas, deadlines, campaign notes. Then, slowly, they shifted. Compliments, inside jokes, late-night confessions typed between drafts and mock-ups, photos, nothing obscene, but intimate in a way that left no doubt. He read every word, from the first hesitant, "can't stop thinking about you" to the last, sent that same afternoon. "Lunch today was perfect. Wish we didn't have to pretend." The phone slipped from his hand. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at it lying face down on the desk, the screen still glowing faintly. It wasn't anger that filled him. It was the absence of it. A stillness so vast it frightened him. He stood, walked to the window. Snow fell in thin, crooked lines under the city lights. Somewhere below, sirens wailed, muffled by distance. He pressed his hand against the glass, his reflection pale, hollow-eyed. In the reflection, he saw a man he barely recognized, someone stripped of illusions, of warmth. A man who understood that love, once betrayed, doesn't explode. It decays quietly, like frost spreading over glass. Rachel stirred in the bedroom, her voice soft. "Ethan, what are you doing up?" "Couldn't sleep," he said. She smiled sleepily. "Come to bed." He turned off the light, leaving the phone where it was, and walked toward her. She reached for him under the blanket, curling against his chest. He held her, not out of love, but out of calculation, the beginning of something colder, sharper. Her breathing slowed. He stared into the darkness, his mind working silently. He now knew the truth, and with that truth came clarity, the kind that no longer sought confrontation or tears, only balance. He wouldn't scream, wouldn't beg, wouldn't ask why. He would wait. He would choose the moment. Because some betrayals deserved more than words. They deserved consequences. The morning after Ethan read the messages, the world felt unnervingly calm. He woke before Rachel, lying beside her in the dim light filtering through the curtains. Her head rested gently on his arm, her breathing soft, peaceful. He studied her face, the familiar curve of her cheek, the faint lines around her eyes, the small scar on her chin she used to hide with makeup. She looked innocent in sleep, like the woman he used to know. But Ethan had seen too much now to be fooled by peace. When she stirred, murmuring something half-dreamed, he closed his eyes and pretended to be asleep. She kissed his shoulder before slipping out of bed, the same habitual tenderness that once made him feel loved. Now it felt like theater. He listened to her morning routine, the soft click of the bathroom door, the running water, the faint hum of her voice as she got ready for work. Every sound felt amplified, significant. When she left the apartment, the silence that followed seemed to fill every corner. Ethan rose and stood at the window, staring at the snow-covered city. He should have confronted her. That's what decent men did: ask for truth, demand explanations, end things cleanly. But decency felt hollow now. She hadn't been decent with him. She'd lied with the ease of breathing. There was a particular cruelty in betrayal, the way it didn't just wound you, but rewired you. Ethan no longer felt like himself. Something colder had taken his place, something precise and methodical. He didn't want to scream or throw things. He wanted control. He spent the morning moving through their home like a stranger cataloging evidence. The lingering scent of her perfume in the hallway, a lipstick-stained coffee mug, her silk robe tossed carelessly over a chair. Every detail felt tainted. It was around noon when he opened the top drawer of her nightstand. Inside were all the quiet, private things that spoke of intimacy, perfume samples, jewelry, a few letters from their early days, and beneath them, a small, velvet pouch. He knew what it held. The lubricant bottle gleamed faintly under the light, familiar and suddenly revolting. He held it in his hand for a long moment, turning it over, studying it as though it were an artifact of another life. The idea came to him not as a burst of anger, but as something slow and deliberate like ice forming over still water. Revenge didn't need to be loud. It could whisper. It could be poetic. He drove to a hardware store on the outskirts of the city. The air outside was sharp, the sky flat and colorless. He walked down aisles of tools and paints, past shelves of adhesives and solvents, until he found what he was looking for: a small bottle of industrial-grade clear glue. The label promised permanence. He bought it without hesitation. The cashier, a young man with tired eyes, smiled politely and said, "You working on a project?" Ethan returned the smile, faint but steady. Something like that. Back home, he sat at the edge of the bed, the two bottles in front of him, the lubricant and the glue. They looked identical. He unscrewed both caps, inhaling the faint chemical scent of the glue, sharp and sterile. His hands didn't shake. It wasn't the act itself that consumed him, it was what it meant. This was no longer about punishing her body. It was about marking the truth, stripping away the illusion of her control. She had humiliated him quietly, privately, in the spaces between words and lies. He would return that humiliation with equal precision. He poured the glue carefully, drop by drop, into the empty bottle, sealing it again, shaking it lightly to ensure the texture remained the same. When he was done, he placed it exactly where he'd found it, aligning it perfectly in the drawer. Then he sat there, breathing slowly, staring at his reflection in the mirror across the room. He expected to feel guilt. Instead, he felt nothing. That evening, Rachel came home later than usual. She looked radiant again, cheeks flushed, hair tousled slightly from the wind. "You're still up," she said, surprised. "Couldn't sleep," he replied. "Rough day? Just long." He smiled, a careful, measured smile. "You?" She hesitated. "The same." She set down her purse, poured herself a glass of wine, and joined him on the couch. They watched a movie, one neither of them really paid attention to. Every so often, her phone lit up on the table. She ignored it, though he saw her eyes flicker toward it. After the movie, she leaned in, resting her head against his shoulder. "I've missed this," she whispered. He looked down at her, his hand brushing her hair. "Yeah," he said softly. "Me too." She kissed him, then gentle, hesitant, as if testing the water. He kissed her back, carefully, almost tenderly. The familiarity of it stirred something painful in him, a memory of who they used to be. But behind the calm of his face, his mind was a silent storm. When she reached for his hand, guiding him toward the bedroom, he let her. The apartment was dark, except for the faint city glow spilling through the windows. As she disappeared into the bathroom, he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the drawer where the bottle waited. He felt his heartbeat slow, steady. From the bathroom came the sound of running water, the faint hum of her voice, light and careless. For a moment, he closed his eyes and tried to remember their first night together, the laughter, the warmth, the way she had whispered his name as if it meant something sacred. That memory flickered and died. When Rachel returned, she smiled, reaching for him. The drawer opened, the sound sharp in the quiet room. He didn't stop her. He didn't move. Afterward, when she slept beside him, breathing softly, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling. The act was done. His revenge, silent and cruel, now lived between them like a ghost. But there was no satisfaction. Only the heavy stillness of a man who had crossed a line he could never return from. In the darkness, he realized something bitterly ironic. She had betrayed him with desire, and he had betrayed himself with hate. Both had destroyed the same thing, the love that once made them human. Outside, snow kept falling, soft and relentless, erasing footprints from the world below. It started on a gray Monday morning, the kind where the air seemed heavy with unspoken things. Ethan was in his office, pretending to focus on his work while the city outside moved as usual, cars passing, people rushing, the world unaware of what was about to unfold. His phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating once, twice, before lighting up with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo. He stared at it for a long time before understanding what he was seeing. Rachel, his wife, half-dressed, lying in a hospital bed. Her face was pale, streaked with tears. Tubes and wires clung to her body. The caption beneath the image said only, "Emergency room. Complications at the office." For a moment, his heart froze. Then another message came. This one was a video. The clip showed a group of paramedics rushing through the glass doors of the marketing firm where Rachel worked. A crowd of employees had gathered in the lobby, their phones raised, recording. Through the blur of motion, Ethan saw her, Rachel, slumped in the arms of another man, Dylan Ross, her lover. His expression was wild, panicked. But what caught Ethan's attention wasn't the fear in Dylan's eyes. It was the way he dropped her hand the moment the cameras turned toward them. The story spread within hours. By noon, the company's name was trending on social media. Someone had posted an anonymous thread titled, "Affair Gone Wrong at Stratton Marketing Married Executive Hospitalized." The internet devoured it. Pictures, gossip, speculation, it all unfolded like a slow-motion disaster. Rachel's name wasn't mentioned at first, but it didn't take long for people to connect the dots. Someone from her office leaked screenshots, texts between her and Dylan. The same kind Ethan had once stared at in silence. Only now, the world could see them too. By evening, Ethan's phone was a battlefield of notifications, friends, colleagues, even relatives reaching out with pity or curiosity disguised as concern. His assistant knocked on the door once to ask if he was okay, and he told her to cancel his meetings for the rest of the day. He needed silence. He sat at his desk long after the sun went down, the only light coming from the screen. He opened one of the news articles out of some grim compulsion. There was her photo, Rachel, smiling in a company event, glass of champagne in hand. The headline cruelly sharp beneath it. Married executive's secret affair ends in scandal. Coworker flees scene. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. He had imagined revenge, imagined satisfaction. But this wasn't what he had planned. The glue, the humiliation, it had been personal, private. What was happening now was public annihilation. When the phone rang again, it was the hospital. The nurse's voice was calm but hesitant. "Mr. Parker, your wife has been admitted. She's stable, but she asked for you." He hesitated for a long time before answering. "I'll be there soon." The hospital was bright and sterile, the kind of place where time seemed to lose meaning. When he entered her room, Rachel was awake. She looked fragile, her skin pale against the white sheets. For the first time in years, she looked stripped of all pretense. "Ethan," she whispered when she saw him. Her voice trembled. "You came." He stood at the foot of the bed, hands in his pockets. "They said you wanted to see me." Her eyes filled with tears. "It's all over the internet, isn't it?" He didn't answer. She turned her face away, shame burning across her cheeks. "They know about Dylan, about everything. I didn't think it would end like this." He studied her quietly. "No one ever does." "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "It was stupid, reckless. He promised me—" "Promised what?" "That he loved me, that he'd leave his girlfriend, that we'd start over." Her lips quivered. "But when it happened, when I collapsed, he ran. He just ran, Ethan. He left me there in front of everyone." There was something raw in her confession, something almost childlike in its desperation. But Ethan felt no sympathy, only a hollow ache. He sat down in the chair beside her, his gaze fixed on the IV line that pulsed faintly with her heartbeat. "Do you know what they're saying online?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "That you were poisoned, that it was an accident, that it was a lover's quarrel. They're building stories around you now, turning your pain into entertainment." Rachel covered her face with her hands. "Please, don't say that. I can't—" "You can't what? Face what you've done?" His tone was calm, too calm. "You hid your affair for months, Rachel. You smiled at me every morning, kissed me goodnight, and then went to him. Now the truth is out, and you can't control it. That's what hurts you most, isn't it?" Her sobs filled the room. "Ethan, please, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I never wanted to hurt you like this." He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You already did." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft beeping of the monitor. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Rachel said, "What will you do now?" Ethan stood. "I don't know yet, but whatever happens, it won't be out of anger anymore." He turned to leave. She reached for him, but her hand fell back weakly. "Ethan, please, don't hate me." He paused at the door, his reflection caught in the small glass window, a tired, broken man whose love had turned to ash. "I don't hate you, Rachel," he said softly. "I just don't recognize you anymore." Outside the hospital, the night air was cold, biting. Reporters were already gathering at the entrance, cameras flashing as nurses tried to hold them back. Someone shouted his name, but he ignored them, walking past the chaos, through the snow-covered parking lot. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a headline notification. CEO's wife hospitalized after affair scandal, coworker Dylan Ross resigns and disappears. Ethan stared at the screen until it dimmed. The snow kept falling, the world moving on, but inside him, something shifted quietly. The revenge, the anger, the humiliation, it had all come full circle, and yet it felt strangely empty. The woman he once loved was destroyed. The man she betrayed him with had vanished, and he was left standing in the ruins of everything they had built together. For the first time, he realized the truth that cut deeper than betrayal sometimes. When love dies, it doesn't end with a scream. It ends with silence. At first, Ethan believed he had won. The morning after the scandal broke, the world seemed strangely quiet, as if holding its breath after a storm. He stood by the window of his penthouse apartment, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in his hand. The city stretched out beneath him gray, indifferent, unaware of the quiet chaos he had unleashed. He told himself he felt nothing. No regret, no satisfaction, just the cold neutrality of a man who had restored balance, who had taken back power in the only way he could. Rachel had betrayed him, shattered their vows, humiliated him behind closed doors. What happened to her, he reasoned, was simply justice. But justice, he discovered, had an echo. By mid-morning, his office became a gallery of hushed voices and half-averted eyes. Colleagues greeted him with forced smiles, their pity disguised as professionalism. In the reflection of the glass walls, Ethan saw what they were too polite to say they knew. Maybe not the full truth, but enough to judge. Enough to turn him into a character in a story whispered in hallways. His assistant, Marcy, handed him his schedule for the day, but avoided his gaze. "Should I cancel the afternoon meeting with the Stratton board?" she asked quietly. "No," he said, his tone clipped. "We'll proceed as planned." When she left, he exhaled and sank into his chair. The office suddenly felt too large, too sterile. The muted hum of the air conditioning was the only sound. He reached for his phone, scrolling through the headlines again despite himself. Corporate affair scandal expands sources suggest deliberate sabotage. That line froze him. Deliberate sabotage. The phrase spread like poison in his mind. Someone had guessed, or maybe Rachel had talked. His chest tightened. He had done it, yes, but he hadn't meant for it to go that far. The glue, the pain it had been meant as a cruel reminder, not public ruin, not a hospital bed, not this. He closed his eyes, pressing his fingers against his temples. The memory of that night returned the quiet kitchen, the sound of the bottle cap twisting open, his trembling hands. The act had felt almost sacred in its stillness, a secret between him and his rage. But now, it was no longer secret. It was out there, reflected in the stares of strangers. Later that day, he went to the hospital again, not out of love, but something closer to obligation. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and grief. When he entered Rachel's room, she was sitting up this time, her face pale, eyes ringed with exhaustion. A nurse adjusted her IV and nodded at him before leaving them alone. "You shouldn't be here," Rachel said softly, her voice rough from medication. "Maybe not," he replied. For a long time, neither spoke. He noticed the faint bruising on her wrist, the way her fingers trembled as she tried to sip water. There was no trace of the confident woman she used to be, the one who laughed at his dry jokes, who danced barefoot in their kitchen on Sunday mornings. She broke the silence first. "They think someone did this to me," she whispered. "They think it was Dylan. Or someone else." Her gaze flickered to him, uncertain. Ethan felt his stomach twist. He wanted to tell her everything, to confess, to explain that it hadn't been out of hatred, but heartbreak. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he said, "Do you still love him?" Rachel blinked, startled. "I don't even know who he is anymore." Her voice trembled on the edge of despair. "He's disappeared. The company suspended me. Everyone's talking about me like I'm a scandal, not a person. And you," her voice cracked, "you just stand there like none of it matters." He turned away, looking out the small window. The city skyline shimmered beyond the glass, golden and distant. "Maybe that's all we ever were, Rachel," he said quietly. "A picture that looked perfect from far away." Her tears fell silently. "Do you hate me that much?" "I don't know what I feel anymore," he said. And that, he realized, was the truth. That night, Ethan walked through downtown alone. The city was alive, bars spilling light onto the sidewalks, laughter and car horns mixing with the hum of neon. He kept his hands buried in his coat pockets, his thoughts heavy. At a crosswalk, a man in a suit glanced at him and did a double take, recognition flashing in his eyes. Ethan heard the whisper as he passed, "That's him, the husband." The words followed him like a shadow. The husband. Not the architect, not the businessman, just the man whose wife had cheated, whose revenge had gone too far. By the time he reached the bridge, the wind had turned cold. He leaned against the railing, staring down at the dark water below. In the faint reflection, he saw his own face tired, haunted, older somehow. He thought about Rachel, about how their love had once been real, untainted. He thought about the first time he'd seen her laugh, how that sound had felt like home. And now, that memory hurt more than anything else. Guilt began to creep in, not sudden, but slow, seeping into the cracks of his certainty. He had thought his revenge was poetic justice, a restoration of dignity. But now he saw it for what it truly was, an act of cruelty disguised as balance. He imagined what people were saying online, the speculation, the jokes, the cruelty. He pictured Rachel scrolling through those comments from her hospital bed, her shame amplified for the world's entertainment. And he saw himself reflected in that ugliness. The next morning, he went to church, not out of faith, but desperation. He hadn't stepped into one in years. The pews were mostly empty, the stained glass windows casting muted colors on the worn floor. He sat in the back, head bowed. The priest, an old man with kind eyes, approached quietly. "You look troubled, son," he said. Ethan didn't look up. "I did something I thought was justified. Now I'm not sure anymore." The priest nodded slowly. "Justice without compassion becomes vengeance, and vengeance doesn't heal, it corrodes." Ethan closed his eyes. The words sank deep. When he left, the morning sun was breaking through the clouds, faint but real. He didn't know what forgiveness looked like, or if he even deserved it. But as he walked away from the church, he felt the first stirrings of something fragile inside him. Remorse, perhaps, or the beginning of clarity. He had destroyed the woman who betrayed him, but in doing so, he had also destroyed the man he once was. And for the first time since it all began, Ethan Parker realized that guilt, unlike revenge, doesn't end when the act is done, it begins there. The weeks that followed the scandal blurred together like a gray smear across time. Rachel's world, once polished, controlled, enviable, collapsed piece by piece until nothing familiar remained. It started with the board meeting she wasn't invited to. Then came the official email, "Your position has been terminated, effective immediately." No explanation, no courtesy, just a line of corporate indifference. Her name was quietly removed from the company website, her access revoked, her reputation buried beneath whispers. The internet had already done its damage. Articles labeled her the fallen executive, the scandal at Stratton, and worse. Strangers argued over her morality like she was a character on a reality show. On the streets of New York, she felt eyes following her, curious, judgmental, unrelenting. Her apartment, once shared with Ethan, now felt like a museum of mistakes. His absence echoed through every room, the smell of his aftershave fading from the bathroom, his books still lined neatly on the shelves. She tried to throw them away once, but couldn't. They were remnants of a life she had destroyed with her own hands. One night, after too many pills and too little sleep, her sister Claire found her collapsed on the kitchen floor. The paramedics came. The next thing Rachel remembered was waking up in a rehab facility upstate, surrounded by white walls, clean sheets, and silence so deep it pressed against her chest. The counselors called it a recovery program. She called it a sentence. Each morning, she joined a circle of strangers, addicts, liars, broken people, each confessing their sins to the void. At first, she refused to speak. She wasn't like them, she told herself. But by the second week, she realized she was exactly like them, hiding pain behind pretense, guilt behind control. It was during one of those long nights, when the world outside seemed impossibly far, that she began to write to Ethan. She hadn't planned to, but words had always been her refuge, and now they came to her like a confession she could no longer hold back. She started slowly, her handwriting shaky at first. Dear Ethan, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe you've moved on. Maybe you hate me too much to care. But I need to write it anyway, not for forgiveness, but because I can't live with the silence anymore. When I look back at us, I see everything we were supposed to be. I see the nights we spent building dreams, the small apartment where we started with nothing but faith in each other. I remember the way you used to trace circles on my back when I couldn't sleep, how you'd whisper that we'd make it, and we did for a while. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. You were always chasing purpose, and I was chasing attention. The more you built, the smaller I felt. I wanted to feel wanted again, seen again. Dylan wasn't love. He was a mirror reflecting what I thought I'd lost in you. I can't explain why I did what I did, only that I was weak. Every message, every lie, it was like watching a car crash in slow motion, knowing I couldn't stop it. I thought I was in control, but I wasn't. When the scandal broke, I wanted to disappear. And when I ended up in that hospital bed, I wished I had. You stood there that night, and I saw it in your eyes, the distance, the disgust, the pain I had caused. And I knew something inside you had broken, maybe forever. The world thinks I'm paying for my sins now. But they don't know the real punishment. It's waking up every morning knowing I destroyed the only person who ever truly loved me. I hear your name in the news. Sometimes your company's growing, they say. You look strong, successful, untouched. But I wonder if you still think about me. Not with love, maybe not even with anger, but with some small flicker of memory. They tell me healing starts with acceptance. I'm trying, Ethan, trying to forgive myself, even when I don't believe I deserve it. I want to thank you for the years you gave me, for the love I betrayed, and for the silence you've kept. I know now that silence can be kinder than words. If this letter ever reaches you, I don't expect a reply. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, completely, endlessly sorry. Rachel. She folded the letter carefully, sealing it with trembling fingers. The counselor, a woman with kind eyes named Laura, watched her quietly. You don't have to send it, she said. I know, Rachel replied, staring at the envelope, but I think he deserves to know that I finally understand. That evening, she walked to the edge of the rehab's garden, where the last of the autumn leaves clung to the trees. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of rain. She slipped the letter into the outgoing mail bin, her heart pounding. For the first time in months, she felt something shift inside her. Not peace, not yet, but release. Back in her room, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Around her, the other patients slept soundly. But Rachel's mind was alive, flooded with memories, Ethan's laugh, their road trips, the small fights that never mattered until they did. She realized that love, once lost, doesn't vanish. It lingers in fragments, in the spaces between regret and redemption, in the quiet moments when the heart finally admits the truth. Days passed. She attended therapy, wrote in journals, learned to breathe again. Her body began to heal, but her soul was slower. Sometimes she saw herself in the other women there, women who had lied, cheated, hurt people they loved, and it humbled her. Pain had a way of making strangers feel like mirrors. One afternoon, Laura handed her a stamped envelope. It's been sent, she said, to New York. Rachel nodded, her throat tight. Thank you. That night, she stood by the window, looking at the faint outline of the moon through the clouds. Somewhere, she thought, Ethan might be reading her words, or maybe he had thrown them away without opening them. Either way, she had spoken her truth. And for the first time since everything fell apart, Rachel Parker didn't feel like she was running from herself. She wasn't healed. Not yet. But she was finally facing the mirror. Winter had begun to loosen its grip when Ethan finally decided to see her again. The city was soft with the gray light of early spring, streets slick from melting snow, the air heavy with the faint promise of renewal. He had carried her letter for months, creased, folded, unread at first, then read too many times to count. Every word had settled somewhere inside him, not like forgiveness, but like a slow, persistent ache. He hadn't planned to visit. Closure was a word people used when they didn't know how to let go. But one morning he woke up before dawn, the apartment still and cold, and realized he had nothing left to lose by facing her one last time. The drive upstate was long, quiet. The road cut through stretches of barren trees and small towns still half asleep. He rehearsed what he might say, then abandoned the thought altogether. Words had always failed them at the end. The rehab facility sat at the edge of a forest, its red brick walls softened by ivy and time. It looked more like a boarding school than a place for broken people. When he stepped through the doors, a receptionist looked up with cautious kindness. "She's in the garden," the woman said. "She's been expecting you." He didn't correct her. The garden was small, framed by old stone paths and benches worn smooth by weather. He saw her before she saw him, sitting near the fountain, a book resting unopened on her lap. Her hair was shorter now, her face paler, softer somehow. Time had taken the sharpness from her, leaving something quieter behind. When she looked up, their eyes met across the distance. Neither moved for a long moment. Then Rachel rose slowly, hesitating as if afraid he might vanish. "Ethan," she said, her voice almost a whisper. He nodded. "Rachel." They stood there, awkward and still, surrounded by the sound of water trickling from the fountain. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and lavender. "You look different," she said. "So do you," he replied. She smiled faintly, a shadow of the woman he once knew. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," he admitted. They sat on the bench, a careful distance between them. For a while, neither spoke. Birds moved through the bare branches above them, and somewhere in the distance, a wind chime clinked softly. "I got your letter," he said finally. Her hands tightened around the edge of her coat. "Did you read it?" "More than once." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the ground. "I wasn't expecting you to answer. I just needed you to know." "I know." He looked at her, really looked this time. There were faint scars along her wrists, barely visible, but there. And in her eyes, something deeper than guilt acceptance. "You seem better," he said quietly. "I'm trying." She gave a small, fragile laugh. "They say healing isn't linear. Some days I wake up and I almost believe I'm okay. Other days..." Her voice trailed off. "Other days I remember everything." He nodded. "I know the feeling." Rachel turned to him then, studying his face. "You look tired," she said softly. "Not the kind of tired sleep fixes." He gave a hollow smile. "Maybe I am." She hesitated before asking, "Did you hate me?" "At first," he said honestly, "I thought hate would make it easier. It didn't. It just kept me tied to what I was trying to escape." Her eyes glistened. "And now?" He looked toward the horizon, where the pale light broke through clouds. "Now I don't know. Maybe I stopped trying to define it." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Rachel took a deep breath. "I've thought a lot about that night," she said, "about everything that happened. I wanted to believe I was the victim for a while. It was easier that way. But the truth is, I caused all of it. I lied. I betrayed you. And the worst part is, I didn't even understand why." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Understanding doesn't change what happened." "No," she said softly.
but it makes it bearable." He looked at her then, the woman who had once been his whole world. "I wanted you to hurt," he confessed. "When I switched the glue, I told myself it was symbolic, poetic justice. But it wasn't justice. It was cruelty. I became the thing I hated." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "We both did terrible things, Ethan. I don't think forgiveness is supposed to erase them. It just means we stop letting them define us." He stared at her, absorbing the words. Somewhere deep inside he felt something unclench. Something he hadn't realized he'd been holding on to. "I came here to tell you I forgive you," he said after a long silence. "But I think that's not the point anymore." She looked at him, her tears finally spilling over. "No," she whispered, "it's not." They sat there together,
Not as husband and wife, not as enemies or victims, but as two broken people who had finally stopped bleeding. The past hung between them, unmovable, undeniable, but for once, it didn't suffocate them. "I'm not coming back, Rachel," Ethan said quietly. "I know," she replied, "and I'm not asking you to." He nodded. "I hope you find peace. I hope you do too." The sky above them had turned a soft gold. The light caught in her hair, and for a fleeting moment, Ethan saw her as she once was the woman he had fallen in love with before ambition and betrayal had devoured them both. When he stood, she didn't try to stop him. Instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing his hand for the briefest moment. It wasn't reconciliation. It was farewell. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said. He looked at her one last time. "Goodbye, Rachel." As he walked back toward the car, he felt the weight of years lifting, not disappearing, but shifting less like punishment, more like memory. The road stretched before him, winding through the forest, sunlight breaking through the clouds. He rolled down the window, breathing in the cool air. For the first time in a long while, it didn't hurt to remember. It just was. Back in the garden, Rachel watched his car disappear down the hill. She sat there until the fountain's soft rhythm was the only sound left. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer, not for him, not for herself, but for the fragile peace that had finally found them both. They would never share a life again, but they had shared a forgiveness not the kind that binds, but the kind that frees. And in that quiet, broken ending, there was something almost sacred, a truth neither of them had understood until now. Sometimes, forgiveness isn't about absolution. It's about release. It's about learning to live again,